Welcome to the EW podcast. I'm your host, Eric White, and today I'm joined by Rikki Schlott. Rikki is a student at NYU. She is a major in history, is minoring in politics and philosophy. She's also an intern for the Megyn Kelly Show and a contributing writer for the Daily Wire. So how goes it, Rikki?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation too. It's been cool to see you and your co-host on Clubhouse, Christopher Wells, kind of get a lot of attention and hosting these really great
Yes,
rooms through Greg Ellis's The Respondent Club. I think, yeah,
absolutely.
we'll definitely get there and talk about that. But I think I want to start about you and just get
Okay.
to know you a little more. So who is Rikki Schlott? Who are you? Where do you come
Um,
from?
yeah, so I grew up in New Jersey, and as you said, I'm at NYU right now. I took a year off of school this year because of the pandemic, and I thought I wanted to go down the law path, and that was sort of the life track that I was headed down. And then this year kind of happened, and I came into my own politically a little bit more, and got a little more confident about speaking out against what I think is kind of ideological orthodoxy that's taking over in my generation. And so I started contributing to the Daily Wire. I have a few more writing sort of contracts in the works right now that I'm figuring out, and working for Megyn Kelly, doing her research on her podcast, which has been really an interesting experience. And I get to dig into these amazing guests that she has. And yeah, now I'm kind of just taking it as it comes a little bit. I signed a book deal recently.
What?
Yeah,
Cool.
which is it sounds so crazy to say, with a an NYU professor, and we're co-authoring about sort of navigating college life as a political outsider of any variety, really, that just doesn't conform to the kind of woke standards on campus. And yeah, I'm figuring out how to kind of filter back into school now that my leave is up, but definitely headed down a newfound political route, and found this crazy little niche of like the intellectual dark web on Clubhouse and everything. And I'm just sort of diving in, and maybe like one of the few Gen Z people crazy enough to come out against this stuff. So it's really been fruitful for sure. So
Yeah. It's I guess heartwarming might not be the right word, but inspiring and gives me some confidence in the future to see people like yourself and Christopher Wells
thank
taking
you.
a different stance. You know, I think Coleman Hughes is another person. I think he's in Gen Z,
Absolutely.
who's
Yeah.
also not interested in the orthodoxy. So,
Yeah,
how much
absolutely.
more time at NYU do you have left?
So I have 2 years left. I think I might sort of take it a little easy and do it through the summers and kind of part time, because I have all these projects coming up, and like a ton of like writer contracts that I'm going to try to fulfill and juggle. So going to pick and choose a little bit on my classes. I'm finding the course catalogs and the sort of revisionist history that is taught at my school to be pretty off-putting. So I'm going to take it easy and kind of shop it like a consumer is the plan a little bit. But
Okay.
yeah, so it should be 2 more years. I should be in my junior year right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Revisionist history within the history major.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just looking at the course catalog, and over the summer, we only have like 4 or 5 history courses, I think, available. And all of them are just completely tilted, like ideologically. We have one called If Lenin Was on Instagram, Everyday Life in a Socialist State, as a
Hmm.
history course.
Huh.
So it's, there's definitely the kind of woke ideology seeping into every facet and certainly every humanities department, as far as I'm aware, at my school. So as much as I have no problem learning from professors with different political beliefs and ideologies, I really I I reject the teaching me what to think and not how to think. And I think any good teacher should give you the tools to make your own decisions and not try to guide you and steer you. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening on most college campuses now.
I do want to go there and talk more about wokeness on campus and your experience at NYU.
Hmm. Yeah.
just a little bit more background about yourself. Why did you
Yes.
choose to be a history major? History, just from background
Mhm.
about me, I'm extremely interested in history.
Got
I
it.
love World War II history. I'm reading
Got it.
a biography about Oppenheimer right now, American Prometheus. So
Okay.
the nuclear
Yeah.
weapons really interest me.
Yeah.
But yeah, why did you get into history, and is there a period that you're studying specifically?
Yeah, so as you can tell, I'm like really into history, and I started with family history actually. So I have like my
Cool.
whole gallery wall of old family photos. But I think the root of it is that, my dad was 63 when I was born, and so now he's in his mid 80s, and it's certainly a very unusual vantage point to have been born into. I mean, one of the very few Gen Zers whose parent remembers World War II. And so as I was growing up, I'm super close to my dad, and he just exposed me to a much larger breadth of just world history and his life experience as I was growing up. And so that definitely sent me down the history course. And I've always been very much like mind in the past kind of person. And then this year in the pandemic hit, and I kind of just got pulled to like, okay, the here and now is actually really important. And I need to make some moves within the modern context. But yeah, definitely having that outlook from my dad sent me down the history route. And I'm weirdly fascinated by Tudor England. That's sort of my niche that I've yeah, it's
Huh.
very specific for some reason, but I've recently really started digging into American history, and I think this year, just having been born in a context where, I mean, I don't even remember September 11th, and so my whole life I haven't really I've taken my liberties for granted a little bit because I didn't know
Mm.
anything different,
Hmm.
and having this year and seeing a lot of government overreach and mismanagement and stuff really it clarified for me how important American liberties are and how profound they are and how unlikely they are and how genius our founding fathers were. So now I'm kind of getting back into the American history route. So yeah, that's my
That
story with the history major.
that's really well put, Ricky. And I like that
Thank
you
you.
came to that realization about the liberties in America and how unique and
Yeah,
special they are and how they deserve to be protected. I think that
absolutely.
the inability or the lack of knowledge amongst younger generations, and I'm a millennial, I think we're guilty of it too. The lack of knowledge about history and the arc of history and what the American project means to the rest of the world, I think is something that needs to be injected back into the discussion, because it's we have seen calls to burn it down for the past year, and I can't help but wonder how much of history these people actually know who are asking for that, or if they're just cherry
Yeah,
picking history and taking the events that
absolutely.
they believe enforce their viewpoint, right?
Totally. And I think, as someone, I'm a libertarian personally, but I definitely am on like the conservative end of ideology, I suppose. And I think there's something that's just inherently more appealing and attractive to the kind of progressive burn it all down um, ideology that kind of takes over, and that exciting revolutionary thing that gets a lot of young people. Like it's just like a sexier ideology than the idea of like, here maybe what we have is actually super profound and unlikely, and there's some merit to preserving it and freezing it as it is. In some ways, of course, we want to make progress, but at the same time, like, let's back up and realize how wild this moment is in the scheme of human history, and how incredibly blessed the majority of us are to exist in the here and now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think there's also a difference in how much work each one takes. It's a lot easier to throw
Yeah.
matches and gasoline at a house and burn it down than it is
Hmm.
to examine the house thoroughly, look at what is wrong with it, investigate the plumbing, the electricity, and figure out what needs to be fixed. It's just a lot quicker. It seems to be a lot quicker to say, well, let's just burn it down and build a new house, when it's like, well,
Yeah,
we like this house. There's history here. It means something.
absolutely.
We helped build the neighborhood. So yeah, it's,
Absolutely.
yeah, a tough thing, I guess. What makes you a conservative?
I think, I wince at the title Republican for sure. I don't think that that's really a a good characterization of my ideology. But I think, as a libertarian and someone who's really interested in just preserving liberties, I'm definitely more socially liberal, and I kind of have a live and let live ideology. But ultimately, I think I believe that the foundations of the American house, as you put it, are sound, and that there's certainly rot in some walls and some issues that need to be addressed and fixed. But I don't find any home politically with the ideology of let's just like F the system sort of mentality that I think a lot of my generation has. And we inherited it from a generation before us that did like see some really important progress being made. But now we kind of still have that bug to continue to agitate the system. And of course, there are things that absolutely should be addressed. But I think that it's an energy of just wanting to burn things down that got even worse in the pandemic, and the frustration of being cooped up, especially for young people, that it was like almost an outlet for just misdirected emotional energy, I think. And it's really understandable because, a lot of us took the brunt of the lockdowns as people that ultimately weren't really at risk health wise as well. And I think, there have been some really profound fallouts, and one of them is just an intense politicization of this anger that is really kind of scary to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with your thoughts on how the pandemic has exacerbated these issues. But there's also, like you said, something real. Brett Weinstein, who we talked on the phone yesterday, and we both connected on the love for Brett Weinstein. He always says, they've something about their anger is true and warranted. There is something in America that is broken, but the reaction to it is maybe not warranted, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Or at least the methods by which we're trying to kind of rewrite and erase rather than reform. And I think, my position as definitely just a more conservative minded person in general in my generation is like, let's be cautious and actually investigate the roots and not allow the very real emotional aspects of certain sociopolitical issues become the driving factor, because that's when things get dangerous. We need to really like boil it down to, okay, what's the fact and how can we best go about addressing it? And I think that's what my generation unfortunately kind of fails to do fairly consistently. I mean, I think like Jonathan Haidt's The Coddling of the American Mind also is kind of demonstrative of that ideology. And he's an NYU professor, so I'm a little partial to him, but he's been one of my greatest influences for sure. And kind of realizing that a lot of the emotional energy in my generation is the result of how we were raised and also not super healthy.
I admittedly have not gotten to reading that book yet. It's been on my list for so long, but
yeah, it's definitely, it's a good one. Also, The Righteous Mind was one of the most impactful books that I've read as well, because he took such a good nonpartisan stance. The subtitle of the book is Why Good People Are Divided on Religion and Politics. And, I truly believe that we see the other side as evil, but I have a lot of friends on the other side of the political aisle, and we have mutual respect and realize that like we all have the same right moral compass at heart, but we're just coming at it from different reasons. And he takes a really fascinating psychological investigation into both sides. And I think his message is particularly healing right now. And so he's someone that I highly recommend people read and dive into. His Heterodox Academy group I'm also involved with, which is advocating for free inquiry and viewpoint diversity and free speech on campuses. And I think that's also another really important and noble cause.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there seems to be some various satellite groups forming to address what's going on in the universities right now, which is, it's going to take a while, but it's good to see that work is being started, and people with big names are getting behind that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Super heartening.
Yeah. You mentioned your friend group being pretty diverse politically. So is it on NYU, you have friends that are right and left leaning? There's a fair representation of both, or is it more left?
Yeah, NYU, one political poll that we had said that there were more communists than conservatives on our campus. So it's definitely a very tilted student body base. I'm fortunate that my friends are generally pretty accepting of me and they know my morals and principles. And, there's definitely the reaction to wince at like the Republican sort of label and stuff. And that's an extremely taboo sort of thing to be on college campuses. But as a whole, I mean, in terms of like the academic landscape, there's virtually no home for anyone that doesn't think along the ideological orthodoxy. And I know that NYU is particularly bad because we're in New York City of all places. So there's just the kind of left-leaning bias of being in an urban center. But at the same time, the school works great for me because I can be fairly independent and not really be stuck in the bubble of a campus, which is what I was really concerned about because, there's the assumption of shared like collective values on college campuses, politically speaking, that really just don't apply to me. And so luckily I can kind of redefine my personal space and my social bubbles within the context of the broader city, which has been tremendous. So
Yeah, that's great. Do you, with your friends who are more left leaning, is it hard to discuss topics that you're interested in with them, or are you able to have,
Yeah, it's been tough. I've been canceled and, it started the first time I was canceled, I was 15 years old and I wasn't even yet politically conscious. So it was just about like my family's like voting preferences and stuff. And it ended up becoming like a huge thing on my high school campus. So I think once you're canceled once, it's kind of like, okay, you can't really cancel me again. So it's not really an issue. But I mean, I've lost friendships fairly recently over just stepping out of the political orthodoxy. And it's definitely easier to keep your head down and not really pay attention to things. I was just going to go to law school. I was kind of biting my tongue for years and writing essays that I really don't agree with ultimately. And now it's just a matter of principle speaking out. But I'm fortunate to know a lot of open-minded people. I think also one thing that I'm really passionate about is bringing the kind of libertarian ideology to Gen Z, because I think we've been sold on this false lesser of two evils choice with the Democrat and Republican options. And ultimately, we're definitely a more socially liberal live and let live generation. And the libertarian ideology kind of allows for that while also promoting some more fiscally conservative and conservative in terms of civil liberties in its viewpoint that maybe isn't as off-putting to people my age as like the kind of prescriptive evangelizing traditionalism that comes along with some conservatism. So I think having the libertarian label does allow me to make a little bit more progress and have slightly more civil conversations. But definitely I have been canceled. I have plenty of friends who've been canceled for what I believe are truly minor political crimes, because unfortunately, if you don't believe the same thing as everyone else around you, then you're automatically a terrible person with no nuance available, at least on college campuses.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a bummer. Is there,
Definitely.
do liberals exist within your circle or left-leaning people who are open to having these discussions, or is it a pretty, like, if you're left-leaning, you're beholden to that ideology only?
Yeah, I would say I'm particularly fortunate that I have some open-minded friends. And the last thing I want to do is end up in my own echo chamber of just being with friends that I agree with. But unfortunately, I would say predominantly on NYU's campus, and certainly from the anecdotes that I know from friends at different schools, the general assumption is that everyone agrees with you. And if they don't, then like screw them, essentially. And, unfortunately, I think it's a really reductive ideology because we live in the most diverse country in human history, and we all have so many different pieces of life experiences and demographics and things that come together to make us individuals. And the idea that we need to all assign ourselves to these prescriptive kind of packages of ideologies is really unfortunate. And I also think on college campuses where you don't have a lot of voices like mine that are kind of railing against the echo chamber, it hurts not only the people that are self-censoring, but it also hurts the students that do follow the orthodoxy and aren't actually exercising the skills of standing up for their beliefs or engaging in critical debate and reshaping and reforming what they believe. So it's unfortunately a really damaging environment, and I think it's definitely contributing to why our country is so divided as well, particularly my generation. It's amazing how you have the kind of Trump cohort and then the everyone else cohort that just feels like two completely different little bubbles to exist in. So
yeah, for sure. So you said speaking out on campus. Does that mean, are you actively in your classes raising points of debate that go against what is maybe being talked about in the class? Or are you limiting or whenever you say speaking out, do you mean the writing that you're doing online and your experience with Clubhouse? Can you define that a little more?
Yeah. Well, so for me, my first 2 years, I kind of kept my head down in terms of courses. Like I left NYU with a 4.0 GPA. I don't know how that's going to go in the second half now that I'm a little more authentic to my values. But I think, I haven't actually gone back to classes yet with the kind of having grown into myself and said, okay, like these are my principles and I'm going to stand by them no matter what. But certainly before I left school, I would be open in like the kind of dorm room debates. And, it's an extremely political environment. And the assumption is that everybody agrees with you. And so, it's a pretty fast, like, conversation starter to be like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. Don't you hate Donald Trump too? And then fast friends. Like, it's that easy. So there's a lot of political discussion. And when I first got to school, I just wanted to fit in and like make friends. But ultimately, I ended up being more outspoken. And, what I realized from that is that the connections that I did make with people became a lot more fruitful when I was just being authentic to myself. But I also realized, the more times I was kind of publicly canceled or there was a social media post made about me because I didn't believe like this prescriptive value or whatever it might have been, every time my name was smeared, like 5 people would come to me and say, oh, thanks for speaking out. Cause like, actually, I agree with you on this point. And people truly come out of the woodwork. And I think the way that we break down this ideological orthodoxy and we break down this kind of cancel culture censorship situation that's happening on campuses is just by more people being like, no, here I am. And I stand by my values and I'm not a problematic person. I'm not any of the racist, sexist, whatever label they want to throw on people who don't conform. And actually, like, I'm happy to have a conversation and I'm happy to be authentic to my values. And I'm happy to show people that that's something that you can do, which is part of what brought me to Clubhouse and brought me to teaming up with Christopher Wells, is just kind of setting that example, because my Twitter DMs have been absolutely unbelievable. Like, they're just filled with people saying like, thank you for speaking out. And I might be the only person crazy enough to do it because the Twitter mobs come after me a little bit already, but I'm happy to do it. I think that's how we make change, is by being authentic and by demanding our rights and not like allowing this kind of cancel culture to get the best of us.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So you've mentioned a couple of times that you just wanted to keep your head down in school. Was it the last year that changed that for you? Like, what was the moment that made you decide to speak your mind and to be honest to yourself?
Yeah, I think, well, so the thing that's really concerning to me in my personal experience and in anecdotes with friends is I wanted to go to law school. And, I've always been extremely academically oriented. Like I've just been a books kind of kid my whole life. And getting the best grades and achieving at the highest possible degree was the most important thing to me. That was what I was there to do. I was there to study. I took it really seriously. And unfortunately, specifically at NYU, I found that a lot of the assumptions from professors is, I'm going to teach you my personal beliefs. And if you parrot it back to me, which is what I kind of learned to do, for better or for worse, then I'll reward you for that. And the moment that I really, I think I came into my own definitely over the year of lockdown and just thinking critically about, okay, this moment is so much bigger than me getting into law school. And I I have a platform and a voice that I can pave for myself to speak out, however that ends up being. I mean, I don't really know what I'm doing or where I'm going from here, but I'm definitely speaking out. But I think, having the realization of, okay, law school for me personally isn't the most important thing. That was huge. And saying, okay, I'm going to be authentic and see where that takes me, which is definitely a risk to take. And I think like one major issue in academia right now is that, you have a lot of kids that are pre-med and they're in liberal arts undergrad programs, or kids that want to go into some sort of PhD field, or like have this path, and they need to get along through these 4 years and kind of play the game in order to get to where they ultimately want to be. And so the kind of academic achievement loop traps people into just getting along and playing the game. And for better or for worse, I now am uniquely able, because I didn't agree with a lot of the politics on campus, to articulate my own beliefs, but also articulate the opposite opinions. And oftentimes I would learn something I didn't know, and sometimes I would reform and reshape my beliefs. But unfortunately, not a lot of people that kind of exist in the echo chamber bubble are able to articulate the opposition and say, okay, well, the other side says this, and this is why I don't agree with it. And so, for better or for worse, being able to just sort of suck up that ideology and become sort of fluent in it has been a little bit empowering, because I do know the other side, and I know where I've reshaped and reformed and actually said, okay, this has some merit to it and I agree with it. But I also know the boundaries of my own ideology and how it differs from the norm. So yeah, that's kind of my long-winded story of how I pulled myself out of that. And now it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I mean, you Google my name now, and if a professor ever did, it's very obvious that I'm not kind of going along the typical route. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I'm a little
Sounds
nervous,
like that.
but
Sounds like that 4.0 might slip a little bit.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, luckily I'm fortunate enough to be able to take some summer courses, and I got most of my requirements out of the way. So, doing a little research about certain professors. We do have a few really wonderful, open-minded people on our faculty. And so it's just a matter of finding them and networking. And, the more I've been authentic, the more people have come to me, and I'm realizing, oh, it feels like there's no one that agrees with me, or it feels like I'm totally alone on campus. But every time I speak out, I realize that there are like 3 or 4 other kids in my class that are like sitting on their own hands, trying not to be the one, but in fact, we're in this kind of self-censorship. And so we don't think that there's a community, but there actually are a whole lot more moderate people in Gen Z than I think people realize. A recent study from UCLA found like 40% of college freshmen are moderates, which was way higher than I would ever have expected. And I think like a fifth conservative, which is also way higher than I would have ever thought. So, unfortunately, I think we just have like the squeakiest, loudest wheels that really end up being overrepresented in dialogue in our generation. And, setting the example of like broadening out the conversation has taught me for sure that there are greater and more open-minded numbers in my generation than I originally believed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned knowing the other side of the debate, and
Yeah.
knowing it to the point where it helps you define your position a little better and know your position. And I think that's super important as well. And that's one of the things that I think is most terrible about the lack of dialogue between the two sides, is that there's just this loss of empathy. You saw it with Trump, especially during the second election, whenever people from the left were calling people who voted for Trump, 70 million Americans, racist, without taking time to understand that, no, they had their reasons. I wonder, do you have any thoughts like that kind of thinking requires some empathy? And, I do believe that people on the left who are angry at the system and who are the loudest voices, I do believe that a lot of it comes from this sense of wanting a just world. I think a lot of it comes from a good place. I don't think that they're inherently evil or anything, but how what's your sense of how has that empathy been lost? Like they have this great empathy to help lift people up, but then they don't have the same empathy to hear people from the other side. Where do you
Yeah.
have you ever thought about that disconnect or have anything to say on it?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that became really apparent to me during lockdown and having a lot more time to consume both sides, because I always kind of, at NYU, I'd get my dose of the left and then I'd come home and like fill in the gaps of what the other side was saying. But then for several months, I was watching an hour of Fox, an hour of CNN, and kind of comparing. And we live in these two total little echo chamber bubbles of like the caricatures of the opposite side as the enemy. And I think social media is only making that worse. And certainly algorithms that sort of either realize, oh, you're clicking on this because it's the opposite side and it's so outrageous that that's interesting to you, or you're clicking on this because you agree with it. And so we end up going further and further and further down those rabbit holes. But I think, conversations are the most important thing that we can do going forward. And that will kind of require people like me who like stray from the norm to say, actually, no, you can't cancel me. Like, I don't really care that you wrote an Instagram story that you don't like something that I said. I'm going to stand by it. And so as petty as that sounds, a lot of people don't want to have that blowback. But the fact is that I've made a lot of ground with people that I've had conversations with, because they have this idea of what the political other is. And I actually defy that in a lot of ways, particularly by being more socially liberal, which I think is the caricature that sort of like being anti-gay or anything like that they assume someone on the right might be. And so kind of having these conversations and humanizing the opposite side is really the most important thing. And I think in Gen Z especially, it's just going to be a matter of like the people on the right who can afford to speak out really should. And I'm lucky to be one of them now that I think I'm going down this pseudo political route. Like I don't really have to sit on my hands, but yeah, definitely just humanizing ourselves and humanizing the other, because there's so much more common ground than I think we're sold on. And, the media and the bipartisan system are both gaining a lot of traction because they make the other side sound so terrible. And returning that empathy, like you were talking about, unfortunately, I mean, I completely agree that the left is driven by compassion and empathy, but there has to be some understanding that if we're going to live in this country with the other 50%, then we need to afford that same empathy to the groups that we're talking to. And, I don't think the majority of people who voted for Trump in 2016 or in 2020, if you ask them in like 2010, would you ever vote for Donald Trump for president? I don't think the majority of them would have said yes. And so there's something there that brought these people to this kind of bizarre conclusion of like the craziest president that we've ever had. And like,
yeah,
for better or for worse. And there's like, I completely agree with you that there are, of course, there's always going to be the fringe of people that are actually similar to the caricature, but there are a lot of Americans that I know and I love that made that decision, and they made it for valid economic reasons, or valid, like feeling dejected and left behind by the kind of theory for theory's sake that's happening in academia and institutions. And
or a protest vote against Biden or Hillary,
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's, I think it's just definitely going to have to come down to conversation. Otherwise, I think it's all going to crumble. I mean, I have only been politically aware really since the Trump era, but I do remember a time growing up when, Democrats and Republicans had tension, but they weren't like enemies at each other's throat. And it's crazy in just a few years to see that really come to pass, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is extremely unfortunate. I agree. And like you said, once someone gets into dialogue with someone that they believe is the enemy, the chance that they're going to find common ground if they're coming to the table in good faith is really high. You keep mentioning you didn't keep mentioning, but you mentioned that people might have an idea of you that you are anti-gay or something. And I feel as though that's got to be a dying breed. I don't know. I don't have numbers on it or anything, but I feel like younger generations don't even think about that, And so
Yeah, absolutely.
how can that, I don't know how that dissolves, but it seems like it
Yeah.
has to.
Yeah. I think also, I mean, that's part of why I push the kind of conservatarian card on people as just an idea to consider, because I think a lot of the kind of whatever name or slander that they throw on people on the right is definitely not actually characteristic, especially of my generation of people that find themselves on the right. And so, yeah, I think kind of, I really do think that the live and let live thing is pretty central to the Gen Z conservative perspective. And that's certainly how I feel. I mean, I might follow more traditional values just myself as an individual, but as much as I don't want anyone to stamp on my rights and tell me how I should live my life, I definitely don't want to tell anyone else that too. And it's a matter of affording that mutually. And so I agree with you that luckily in my own experience of people on the right in my generation, I've never met anyone that was grossly intolerant. I'm sure that there are some, and I don't doubt that at all whatsoever. But I think people have a lot more of a nuanced understanding of what conservatism is in my generation, and especially, you have to swim against the current if you're going to be against the kind of more convenient political status quo. And so, for better or for worse, you really have to come into that ideology and examine it critically. And it's always at every turn, especially in academia, it's challenged. And I know, just anecdotally, I mean, I haven't like fully immersed myself in the workforce yet, but there's corporations that are challenging people's ideologies, and day to day, if you're going to swim against the tide, like you need to kind of build up that stamina. And so people do have a more nuanced and individualist take on politics, I think, as a result of that. So, yeah, especially in Gen Z, it's really difficult to kind of stand up against here are all your friends and all your professors that you admire, and you moved here to learn from them, and they all agree on something. And it makes you feel a little intellectually gaslit sometimes of like, am I dumb? Like, what am I not seeing? But so I think it's easy to fall into the more convenient trap. But those who don't, they have a story to tell and they have reasons. And I think that accessing those people and talking to them and having those conversations are really important.
Yeah. Well, I think this might be a good place to transition to Clubhouse, where you
Yes.
and Christopher Wells are hosting rooms every Saturday that are open to all types of people. There's been Gen Xers in the room listening to you folks. And, it's interesting to me that, like you said, you haven't entered the workforce yet. You're kind of in this period of your life that I guess you could call a learning period, where you're in
Yeah,
school,
absolutely.
you're interning. It's interesting to me that so many people are turning to these voices who are in their learning period and looking for reason. What is unique about what you guys are doing on Clubhouse that has made so many people trust and respect what you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm like, holy crap, like I'm 20 and there's thousands of people listening to what I have to say, or like I'm writing this article that's going to reach hundreds of thousands of people on this platform. Like, how should that be allowed? But ultimately, I think, Christopher and I mean, we come at it from like differing perspectives. Neither of us really fall down a strict ideological sort of orthodoxy, but I think we've garnered a lot of attention because not a lot of people are willing to speak out, and I don't blame them. I didn't want to do it for a really long time, and there have been consequences and there have been, social ramifications. But ultimately, I think people are really desperate for this underspoken kind of plurality of Gen Zers and younger people who don't think this way to actually just come out and finally be honest and be authentic. And so, Christopher and I have been willing to do that. And, we're not perfect, and we've both made mistakes, and we've fumbled, and we've learned from people, and we've had really interesting and authentic conversations. But ultimately, I think it's this return to just being honest about political beliefs and embracing like good faith conversation and dialogue, and setting the tone and setting the example in the Clubhouse room that like we want to hear from people on the other side, and we want to respect them and expect the same respect back from them. And I've found that like 95% at least of the people who've been on our Clubhouse stages and engaging in these conversations have been really very constructively. Like if they disagree, it's very respectful. And, I found common ground with people that are just on the absolute opposite side of the ideological spectrum. But it's so interesting how this sort of intellectual dark web pro free speech little microcosm that we inhabit on Clubhouse really bridges people from across the political divide. Like Brett Weinstein, who's calls himself like very much a progressive, is on Tucker Carlson's show sometimes. And it's like, it's kind of difficult to wrap your head around that. But the fact is that it's not really a right left issue anymore. It's just a matter of realizing, okay, I want free and open and unfettered expression of my political beliefs. And therefore I need to grant that to my adversaries as well. And so it's been heartening to see like the political divide being kind of healed for the sake of free speech in this little kind of Clubhouse bubble that we're inhabiting. But yeah, it's been absolutely crazy. Like the first night I had been on Clubhouse, but I'd never used it. Like I just had an account, and Christopher DM'd me on Twitter and was like, do you want to co-host this room? And I thought we'd have like 20 people, and I didn't know how to use the app or how to unmute myself. And then like all of a sudden, like MC Hammer and Brett Weinstein and Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris and like these crazy mind-blowing people were all there. So it didn't really feel real. It still kind of doesn't, but I'm so grateful for the platform. And it's been such an amazing way to meet people and have these really much needed healing conversations and just humanizing the other. It's been so humbling. It's such an honor to be able to be a part of all that.
Yeah, for sure. And I can just, I want to ask you about the genesis of those rooms more, and how you and Christopher came to be, how Greg Ellis, our mutual friend, came to be involved. But I can just imagine, I'm thinking of my parents right now being like, what the hell is Clubhouse? So I'm just going to give a quick overview for those who haven't heard of it. It's basically a audio only app where people can enter rooms on certain topics. There's a group of speakers who are conversing with one another. And then there's an audience where people can raise their hand to join the stage. I saw a good analogy. I think Naval posted on Twitter saying that Clubhouse is to podcasts what live shows are to rock bands, where it's like you can have a lot more interaction with the audience, with their fans. So it's basically just an audio only conversation platform that's been gaining in popularity. So what has your experience been like creating the room, meeting Christopher? Mm-hmm. How did this get off the ground? Can you just give us the genesis of Gen Z?
Yeah. So Christopher and I met through like an NYU politics club meeting, just in like this big Zoom forum, and we ended up talking in the like the DM section of the Zoom. And then we followed each other on Twitter. And I think he found himself in the respondent Clubhouse room at some point and just went up to Greg just on his own and was like, can I start a Gen Z room in your little Clubhouse? And then he got the thumbs up on that. And then he asked me, because we had put together that we were both on the same sort of pro free speech bent. And so we talked like verbally the first time, like an hour before this Clubhouse room even started. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, oh, I'll figure it out. Like maybe we'll have like 4 or 5 of our Twitter followers there. And then it was like like MC Hammer was there and then all of his fans were there. But we called the room Gen Z Against Wokeness, which ended up kind of derailing the entire conversation. I didn't choose the room title, Christopher did, but I totally stand by it. Because I think, language is very fluid, and, the idea of being woke originally meant just being woke to, people's struggles or different experiences. And that's something that I think is critical. And I stand by the original iteration of what that word means. But obviously for Gen Z, it has a very different connotation. And wokeness kind of brings up the excessive identity politics, like censorship, cancel culture, ideological orthodoxy, and this kind of extreme progressivism. And so it definitely has a different and more nuanced meaning within the Gen Z context. And so we got a lot of pushback and blowback, but I think, at one point we said, oh, maybe we'll change the title of the room. And we had a little bit of a debate about that. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not gonna I'm not going to give in to the language police here. Like, I'm happy to clarify what I mean and what I do and I don't stand against. But yeah, so the Gen Z Against Wokeness room kind of came together in that way. And then we had a few little spin-off rooms. We did one on addiction. We did one on Gen Z and hookup culture, which was super interesting. And we also brought in another Gen Z voice, this girl, Charlotte, and it was a really fascinating conversation. Yeah, my parents actually, my dad popped into the audience of that one, and I texted him. I was like, "You got to get out of here right now." But it's been really impressive. My 84-year-old dad, I think now, has managed to figure out Clubhouse. So I'm kudos to him on that one. But yeah, it's been a really interesting platform, and we've found a lot of like-minded Gen Z individuals who are from like the complete ideological spread of left to right, just entirely all over the place. But we all agree on like this rise of a liberalism is the problem. And, you know, I don't really care to continue to fight in the gridlock of party politics, because I think our institutions are set up for that to fail. And ultimately, you know, there are enough people waging the Democrat-Republican war. And it's been super awesome to find more people in my generation who are like, yeah, actually, illiberalism is the problem, and we need to return to this classical liberal ideal. So yeah, that's sort of the genesis of the Gen Z Against Wokeness room. It's been such a crazy time. We've had the craziest people show up in that in those conversations. And yeah, my personal highlight was Brett Weinstein coming in the first night, because I was in high school, I think, when the Evergreen State thing happened, and I followed that very closely, and he's been one of my heroes. And then, you know, I was getting kind of grilled by this girl who was gaslighting me a little bit about what wokeness meant. And then all of a sudden, Brett just rose up into the audience and like came to my defense, and then just disappeared again, and then followed me on Twitter. And I was like just about dying. So that was my highlight for sure. And you know, some really amazing voices. Peter Boghossian, another person whose like books are on my bookshelf as I'm having a conversation with him on Clubhouse. Like, whoa.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So that's been happening every Saturday, right? That's going to continue happening every Saturday.
Yeah, that's the plan. Obviously Christopher's in school right now, and like it's been weird to plan, but yeah, we've been doing that on an every Saturday basis. And, you know, we've started this network of, we're calling it like Gen Z student dissidents. And we have like a Discord server, and kind of working on projects of how, you know, we have like Heterodox Academy and FIRE and all these kind of professor run organizations that fight for free speech. But ultimately, it's really going to come down to people being brave enough to speak out and take a risk as a student. And so we're kind of in the works of talking about how we can make a student network run by and made for students to kind of reclaim intellectual and educational integrity on campuses. So that's just another project that we kind of have in the works as a spinoff from the Gen Z situation.
Cool. Very cool. And those are all, that's going to be continued to be hosted in the Respondent Club by Greg Ellis?
I believe so. Yeah, that's the plan. And, you know, Greg was really, he took a shot. I think it was the second room that the Respondent had, and it ended up being, I think, the biggest one to date. And he took a shot on these like 20-somethings who really didn't know what they were doing. But it ended up going really, really well. And it's also been really great kind of practice of honing debate skills a little bit, because it's very uncommon that you have a platform like, you know, on Twitter, you can kind of just hurl insults and little tweets to one another. But on Clubhouse, you really have to engage with the people that you're in conversation with. And that's really valuable. And I think especially that it came sort of to be and came into popularity during the pandemic is huge, because for the people who've been on it, from what I've personally experienced and what I've heard from other people, it's been like a really enriching experience of just humanizing the other and having these conversations across the divide that we really haven't been able to have, because, you know, most people don't have someone who voted for the opposite candidate as them in their social circle, which is really wild. And so maybe this platform in the age of lockdowns is a way to sort of fight back against that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think I know you mentioned, and I was in the addiction room. I thought that was really good. I was also in the hookup online etiquette room, and I thought that was also a great conversation. Do you think the main focus of these rooms, though, moving forward, will continue to be mostly around wokeness and
Yeah, I think,
pushing back against it?
yeah, I think we're kind of, at first we just kind of went into it not really sure where we were going. And we've had these spin-off rooms that have been fruitful, but I think the main goal and the main thing that we're really coming at is this illiberalism that, could be likened to wokeness or however people want to characterize it. And so we had a conversation last night that was really geared towards, okay, how do we start finding solutions? And, it's doesn't really help to just parse out the problem ad nauseum. Like we've all been canceled. We all have our little sob stories, but yeah, now we're talking about solutions. So that's kind of the vision going forward, is to continue to bring more Gen Z voices together. Because, obviously Christopher and I have our own personal stories, but it's broadening that viewpoint in the rooms has been really valuable. So I think wokeness is kind of the center of it, and maybe we'll parse out different aspects and, a day on identity politics and how, us Gen Zers against wokeness think that ultimately is super reductive, and, we demand to return to individualism, or, a different day about cancel culture and self-censorship. So kind of parsing out what these issues are and how ultimately we can solve them that's where we see this going, I think.
I think here in the interview is where I want to push back a little bit.
Okay.
I find that there's, the wokeness thing is probably going to be a problem for a long time. I don't see any quick solutions to it necessarily.
Yeah, I agree.
And so sometimes I wonder, and I'm eager to hear what you have to say about this, but I wonder if we're focusing too much on wokeness these days, and the conversation has become, there's a lot of bigger topics, more existentially important topics to discuss in our worlds right now. And I wonder if you have any thoughts or can change my mind or weigh in on this, but I wonder if it would be better to have conversations around these topics of greater, I don't want to say importance, but more pressing topics. Like nuclear weapons is one that I'm interested in, and is a discussion that needs to happen. And instead of focusing on wokeness specifically, modeling free speech and free debate in these conversations and enforcing some sort of anti-woke rule among these speakers, and I don't know if you have any thoughts or pushback on that, but I'm eager to hear what you think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree that, we need to be able to export this classically liberal model of conversation beyond just the conversation of fighting for classical liberalism, and to apply it in other ways. I think my only feeling is just that specifically within the Gen Z perspective, there are obviously the issues that might feel more world crumbling, like illiberalism on college campuses, just from our life experience and where we're at right now, and speaking directly to that. But I completely agree that there should be a place paved to kind of tackle these larger problems. One of the things that Christopher and I are also super interested in kind of exploring a little more is the crisis of faith in our generation, and how, maybe that's not directly wokeness, but, this political fervor that we're seeing is a result of the crisis of faith. And, we've discussed broader issues like addiction and the hookup culture thing, but I completely agree with you that there are certainly more important conversations to be had. But I also think the Gen Z space right now, where it stands and where our generation is at in terms of our life experience, the biggest threat to our intellectual integrity and the integrity of the education system is kind of how political correctness and political orthodoxy is trickled into our academic institutions. And for me personally, that's sort of the issue that I've latched onto, because I think I've seen the integrity of my personal educational path be eroded by political orthodoxy. And I've found a model for myself that works in sort of, the university was created to bring differing perspectives into one place and the brightest minds together to debate and arrive at greater truth. And I've realized that, well, I can't affect change really in NYU as an institution, but I can demand of my educational experience that within my own self, I'm cultivating debate and engaging with the opposition and putting my personal experiences up against the test of the political orthodoxy and refining and kind of reclaiming that educational ideal within my own mind. And I think, just to go back to, I'm kind of on a tangent here, but I think within the Gen Z context, that's definitely, I think, the most pressing issue. But I don't disagree with you at all that there are certainly other very important issues that require honest, open, free inquiry and free dialogue, and the same model that we're kind of trying to exemplify with the Gen Z rooms.
Yeah. Let's sit here a little bit, because you said it, you think it's the most pressing issue of your generation. I think we've kind of discussed why you think that is, but maybe we can just, in a nice, succinct way here, why is that the most pressing issue to you?
I think that, the idea that we are all coming into our life perspectives from such differing places in Gen Z. We're such a diverse, certainly in America, such a diverse generation. And we have, part of the American spirit was individualism and just belief in selfhood and the value of your own personal goals and your own vantage point. And we're kind of losing that to just the package ideology orthodoxy that we're seeing. And I think ultimately, you have roughly 2/3, or I'm just kind of making up numbers, but, a slight majority of students that are Gen Z people who kind of go along with the ideological tides. And then this large plurality of students who feel completely unserved by, or students and young people who feel unserved by, the general political landscape around them, and are self-censoring and also developing kind of a bitterness around having to do that. And, the way that you fight bad ideas and the way that you fight mistruths is by bringing together differing viewpoints and feeling like you do have a place to fumble and to make mistakes. And, we're young people. We're supposed to be doing dumb things and saying things that aren't going to be immortalized forever. And I think we have like a crisis of authenticity where half of people are kind of saying, okay, I'm just going to go with the flow and agree with everyone. And then the other half of people are saying, I'm just going to pretend that I'm someone that I'm not, and really kind of differ from the core of myself. And that's really sad. And, my biggest thing is like, I want to kind of restore authenticity and give people grace and room and set an example that, you can fumble and you can make mistakes and you can change as a person, and that's part of life and that's allowed. And we don't all have to be kind of perfect PR versions of ourselves. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's psychologically damaging to a whole lot of people to feel that you can't be authentic and can't truly be yourself or have conversations with people on the other side of the divide. And that's sad and unfortunate and something that we need to rectify.
Yeah, for sure. I agree, Rikki. Let me just spit back to you what I heard to make sure that I've got your perspective down. So the reason you believe that that wokeness is the most pressing issue is because of the effect that it's having, particularly on students, where bad ideas cannot be challenged, and those who would challenge them are, in a way, becoming psychologically damaged or driven to conformity, maybe. So we're losing diversity because of wokeness, and therefore bad ideas aren't going unchallenged.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great characterization of what I'm saying. And I also think that, this idea that the most important aspect of diversity is our immutable characteristics. Of course, I want to see a greater breadth of people giving an opportunity and being able to succeed. But at the same time, I think ideological diversity and just freedom of thought is a really important tenet of what diversity also needs to uphold. And that's something that's being forgotten, and ultimately something that I hope in my modest little way I can affect some return to. So
Yeah. Well, I
yeah.
think you're doing a good job, and I support what you and
Thank
Christopher
you.
are doing for sure. So,
Thank you.
if wokeness right now to you is the most pressing issue, what would have to change for that to no longer be true? What would have to change for you to now say that, okay, this has been solved?
I think that, things have kind of gotten a little bit crazier as this year our country's kind of had more time to think and to reckon on our like past mistakes and faults. And things have gotten a little bit wild in terms of overcorrection and just canceling everyone. And like the Bachelor host now has to be erased from like public life for some
Oh,
reason.
really?
And like,
I
I
missed
don't,
that one.
yeah, that was a really crazy one. Chris Harrison, a contestant got canceled for kind of like a insensitive Instagram post. And he said, okay, let's maybe give her a little grace and let her have some time to respond. And then he got canceled for standing up to cancel culture. So things are getting like a little bit, I think, out of control in this sort of mob and pitchfork thing. But I think, the way that this gets solved in my mind is just standing up to that and, demanding that my voice is not going to be silenced. I'm not going to like give into the mob and give into censorship. And that model, I think, is really what needs to be exported. And I've been super heartened by the kind of little network of Gen Z people from all across the political spectrum that are coming together and using this model, and like maybe using a little bit of a feeling of community, and that there are other people like Christopher and like me who kind of have them and have their back, and like, they can get canceled, but there is a community of people that support them. And ultimately, I think the pendulum's going to swing back. It's gone a little too far. I don't think this is an completely irreversible issue, but it's just a matter of, standing up and saying, okay, this has gone too far. And I'm not going to continue to apologize and give power where it's not warranted, and to apologize for something that I'm not authentically apologizing for. And so I think just sort of saying, let's kind of put the brakes on this whole censorship cancellation thing and demand grace and demand compassion again is something that I don't think we're too far gone from being able to do, and something that I think can be rectified. And it's just a matter of modeling that.
Yeah. What do you think is more important or needs to happen first? Because I think there's two. So to me, there's two sides to what you're saying. There's one, we need to not silence, but quiet maybe, or de-lessen the strength of the mob mentality. So you have the people who are demanding cancellation. That is a situation that needs to be addressed. But then there's the other side of people bending the knee and not standing
Mm-hmm.
up for what they believe. So you have
Yeah.
the cancellation and then the giving into the cancellation. Which one do you
Yeah.
think is more important to be addressed, and how do we do that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a big proponent of free speech, and I think you're allowed to go and try to cancel someone if you want to. And so I think really the most important thing is kind of fortifying people with the confidence of being able to say, actually, no, you don't apologize, and setting that example. And I think, I worked for Megyn Kelly, and she was pretty gracelessly canceled from NBC, and that was really life-changing and terrible. And then she now is setting an example of saying, actually, I'm going to make my whole independent media company and say, screw that. And, stand up to cancel culture and stand up for my personal integrity. And I think the answer is not to change how other people are functioning. It's to change how we respond to it. And I think taking responsibility for our own paths and our own like maintenance of our integrity is the most important place to start. And it's also kind of contagious. And I think the more that we say, actually, like Chris Harrison apologized like 3 times for standing up against cancel culture. And, that just emboldens the mob. And I also think,
Yeah.
I'm a little bit optimistic, because I think when the world starts going back to some semblance of normalcy now that, people are getting vaccinated and people are kind of out of their houses a little bit, we might have some more important things to address than just who said what on Twitter and what really reality TV show host towed the line of political correctness. I think we're going to have bigger fish to fry. So I think, we have a shot at fighting back against this.
Yeah. Yeah. While you were talking, I guess you helped me get to visualizing this a certain way of, it's almost as though you want more stoicism, right, in people and being less affected. Whereas if you were trying to maintain the mob, now you're talking about authoritarian type things where you're saying, no, this speech is not allowed. Where really it's like, do what you want, but we need people to be more confident in themselves and less easily manipulated by the mob.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think, it all started with correcting people like Harvey Weinstein, who needed to be kind of eradicated from culture. And that was completely legitimate. But then, you would kind of embolden people and allow people to kind of hurl insults from behind screens to a ridiculous degree. And the more apologies they get, the more they want to continue to do that. And it's kind of fun to tear people and celebrities down from behind a screen, but ultimately now it's impacting real people and kids. I mean, the fact that I was canceled when I was 15 is so crazy. And I know it's happening on college campuses. And high school campuses and middle schools even so much now. And like, it's infiltrated even the most ridiculous little areas of our society, and it's gone too far. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that. I actually saw a poll that like 80% of Americans think political correctness has gone too far, but we've let this 20% have unfettered control of the national dialogue. So it's just a matter of saying we have numbers. Bill Maher is a good example of someone on the left who's saying like, this is insane, and like, let's kind of huddle around that. Commonality right now, I guess.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Bill Maher. I've been, to my friend, just tooting his horn so hard lately because between him and John Oliver has completely lost the script to me. I used to love him, and he's so predictable in what he chooses to say and make fun of that it's almost repulsive. But Bill Maher, I don't know. I don't always agree with him, but you can trust that he's going to be honest and he's going to be open to new information. And he's a great model of this for sure.
100%. I disagree with so much of what he says, but I love that. I feel like if I were in a conversation with him, that would be allowed. And there's not that many people that are like that. And actually, Megyn Kelly was on a show a few times recently, which is pretty cool to see someone actually inviting people from the other side of the political aisle and saying, oh, wait, look, this is a person too. They're not just this terrible, evil caricature of what you think they are. So he's been setting a good example. I've been happy with him as well.
So you mentioned your cancellation when you were 15. Do you care to, what happened?
Yeah. There were rumors that that this is around the Trump election, and I've never been a big Trumpy person by any means, but there were rumors about like, oh, I have a Republican family and stuff, and I went to a boarding school, and that kind of swirled around a little bit, and there was a kind of nasty social media post made about me. My whole administration got caught up in this, and it ended up being kind of a big deal on campus. And there are a lot of terrible, nasty names that were never, there was never any evidence that I think one of the words that was tossed around was racist, which was something that was just so repulsive to me as a Christian, as someone that just could not be farther from a racist. And the defamation was really upsetting as a 15-year-old that I'm worried about acne and boys and like trying to fit in, and like, yeah. I'm not like a political figure. But unfortunately, I saw that the social ramifications were kind of irreversible. And once your name is tainted, that's a really powerful thing. And it's impossible to prove a negative and say, oh, I promise you I'm not like this. But it turned into kind of a nasty situation. And then it kind of bubbled up again a little bit this year when my school was reckoning with a lot of like changing racial ideologies on campus, and some of the other students that were involved in kind of canceling me came back out of the woodwork, and I'm like, I'm just trying to move on with my life. But it made me realize, first of all, okay, people are characterizing me as something that is so counter to my character and my core. And I don't want to give that any credence or give that any power or allow someone to mischaracterize me and who I am as a person. And it was super upsetting. And it was also super empowering because a lot of people came to me and they said, "Oh, I heard that you're a Republican and you think this." And I'm like, okay, wait, why are they making these assumptions, and what do I believe and what don't I believe? And I was kind of challenged, and I became a better exponent of my values because I had this experience of kind of having to engage with these misconceptions about me and say, no, this isn't me. This isn't a good characterization of me. And luckily the school like sided with me and defended me, but this was before cancel culture had a name. And it was, but it was happening and it was real. And yeah, it also gave me the lesson of just kind of being tough to this. Like, people have tried to cancel me since, and I was like, I was 15 and I dealt with
Yeah.
that. Like, you can't,
I was
you can't
canceled before
cancel
I
me
was
now.
driving.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
yeah, it just, I think it made me come to terms with the fact that there was going to be a caricature of who I was as someone that didn't conform politically. And it's really important to be able to fluently and articulately and passionately say, okay, I know that you're assigning this word or label to me, but this is completely not accurate. And here's why. And here's what I don't believe. And here's how you're mischaracterizing me. And I think that's actually one of the biggest things that I want people to learn to do, is to know what you believe and know what you don't believe. So as soon as someone attacks you, especially on a college campus for being kind of a political nonconformist, you say, oh, I see that you're saying that I believe this, but I certainly don't. And here are my personal tenets, and here's what I
Mm-hmm.
stand for. So
Yeah.
fighting back against this mischaracterization is an important thing, and it's something I learned to do.
Yeah. I think that's an extremely valuable lesson, Rikki, for sure. But the one thing that frightens me, and I totally agree with what you're saying, but the thing that is frightening about that, and what happened to you, if that would have happened to you in the last 2 years, it's interesting to think about how that would have been different if the school would have still stood by you. If
Yeah,
college
this
campuses right
whole
now are not accepting students in some cases
mhm,
who have been
yeah,
claimed to be racist by their peers.
yeah,
So
yeah,
there's this need for students to stand up for themselves and for people to be firm in what they believe. But it's so hard, I imagine, whenever you're looking at a school you want to get into and you see this precedent being set of, no, we don't accept racists, and now you're being
yeah,
called a racist.
yeah.
How do you not bend the knee while, still believing that you'll go to that school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, during this kind of year of like reckoning and everything that's happened, a lot of the school administration reversed course on supporting me because they didn't feel that there was a burden of proof of that this was a fair characterization of me as a person, which there's absolutely no proof. And I can tell you just, it absolutely is just not a true statement about me as a human being. So counter. But yeah, the school kind of changed their tune, and it's definitely scary, and that the fact that institutions are playing along with this is scary too. But I have seen like some college, so like U Chicago, I think, for example, kind of came out a few years ago with a letter of like, no, we're actually going to stand against all of this crap, and here's a public notice that this is not something that we condone. And I think following that model is really important. And there have also been some brave and outspoken professors who've set that example too. And I think it's going to have to be kind of a multifaceted fight against this situation. But I agree with you that it's a lot scarier now. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's really difficult to reclaim your character against these slanderous assaults that are almost impossible to fight against. And I think that's also part of the like illiberalism, is that, if you just say this terrible thing about a person, then you don't have to listen to anything that they're saying, and you can kind of just erase them as a person or someone that might have anything of merit that you could learn from. And yeah, that's really unfortunate and scary. But I agree with your characterization. It's a different landscape now,
For
unfortunately.
sure. I hear Greg Ellis in my ear right now talking about how the burden of proof has shifted to now you're guilty until proven innocent, and it's up to the accused to prove their innocence as opposed to having the accuser prove the guilt, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's kind of the fact over feeling, or feelings over fact, I guess, ideology that's taken root, and a lot of these like slanders are extremely difficult to prove not to be true, unfortunately. So it's really sad, and it's really sad for me to think like 15 was so ridiculous, and now I'm hearing it happen to kids that are even younger. And like the idea that we're supposed to be politically aware or politically fluent in any way and able to stand up for ourselves when we're so young, and that's just not even like the slightest thing on our minds, is it's really sad. And it's such a sad precedent that we're setting. And I hope that more people can kind of come together under this Gen Z umbrella, hopefully, and fight against this, because now that we're kind of college age and graduating, we have some responsibility to the next generation that's coming up in this, steeped in this even more than we were, with like critical race theory in schools and stuff. It's really,
Yeah, and suffering all the unknown yet, or I guess in some cases known, mental side effects of the lockdown in the past year, and who knows how that's going to reverberate through our society for the foreseeable future. You know, I saw you wrote a post about that with a lot of really terrifying statistics and instances of students, even 8, 9 years old, exhibiting really frightening mental health problems, which...
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying. And I think, the tension between teachers' unions and well-meaning teachers and student well-being and young people's well-being is really a sad war to be watching, being waged across the country right now. And I think the biggest consequences of all these lockdowns are going to be among the youngest people that have the least context of a normal world to kind of find comfort in. And I worry about also just the growing disparities. We're so worried about equality in this country, and rightfully so. And unfortunately, the socioeconomic disparities are only going to grow in that generation too, in terms of access to adequate education. And, that's horrifying. And also, I'm a huge proponent of school choice. And I hope that, seeing how mismanaged this situation is will empower more students and families to want to regain ownership of their child's education and make some choices, and not just accept this default that's really not serving people adequately.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we're nearing the end of the time here. This has been a real pleasure, Rikki.
Thank you so much.
Full support of what you guys are doing on Clubhouse, and look forward to more stuff from you. Do you want to just drop where people can find you, how people
absolutely.
can get into what you're putting out?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm on Twitter at Rikki Schlott. It's RikkISCHLOTT. And I also have a website that's just rikkischlott.com that I'm kind of congregating all my different writing sort of material on, and definitely kind of growing from just the Daily Wire to a few other outlets that I have some things in the works on. But I'm hoping to stand for some free speech and authenticity in Gen Z. So that's the mission, and that's those are the best places to find me and follow that journey. And I just want to say thank you. This is my first ever podcast, and it's been great. And I'm super honored and flattered that you had me on today. It's been great.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure having you for sure, and I'm sure this will not be your last one, so it'll be interesting to see where things go for you.